everything went wrong in Texas's blackout. Check this out. Leave your comments, ding the bell, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. And with us is Adrian Shelley, the Executive Director of Public Citizen Texas. Citizen.org is the website. And Adrian, welcome to the program.
Tom, thanks for having me back.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks for joining us. So, give us an overview. In the previous hour, I was ranting about deregulation and this whole, weird Republican ideology. But what exactly is going on in Texas, from everything you can tell, and what's the history of this?
Sure. So, Texas has experienced a record-setting freeze that began just at the beginning of this week on Sunday night, Monday morning. And the Texas electricity infrastructure, like much of our infrastructure, just isn't prepared for winter weather. Some of your listeners around the country, especially up north, may be thinking, it's only a couple of inches of snow. Why can't they just deal? And the reality is we just don't have the infrastructure, from the, salt for our roads to the insulation for our pipes and electricity transmission lines. So on Monday, as demand for energy is absolutely skyrocketing, with everyone hunkered down in their homes, sources of electricity generation began to go down. And this really applied across the types of energy in Texas. There were wind turbines that went down. There was a nuclear power plant. There was coal. The largest culprit was natural gas generation. And, unfortunately, this is a problem that we've known about for some time in Texas. Deep freezing storms are rare, but they happen. Probably the last most significant one was in February of 2011, 10 years ago. And at that time, the Texas Senate held joint hearings. The Public Utility Commission of Texas pledged to look into winter weatherization of our electricity infrastructure. There was a federal report that was produced about the need to winterize. But unfortunately, the way that the energy market works in Texas, there's just no incentive for electricity generators to make those investments. We run a market that only rewards generators when they sell energy, and their only incentive is to produce energy cheaply and sell it into the market. We do not provide payments to harden your generation or to ensure that there is additional capacity available should it be needed. Our market is completely deregulated and market-based. So unfortunately, despite the fact that we have known for at least a decade about these problems, the companies that are generating and selling energy in a free market here in Texas just don't have the incentive to do that weatherization that's required to prevent these accidents from happening.
What percentage of the electricity generating and transmitting, I guess, the lines as well that get it from the plant to the local region, and from the local region into people's homes, what percentage of that is owned by for-profit corporations as opposed to municipal utility kind of things?
Yeah, so I can't speak to an exact percentage, but let's start with the universe of electricity that we're dealing with here. We're talking about the Texas grid, right? People may know by now that there are three grids in America. It's essentially the western states, the eastern states, and Texas. And the Texas grid serves about 90% of the state. It doesn't serve El Paso. It doesn't serve the Panhandle, a few places in East Texas. Within the Texas grid, there are a couple of municipally owned utilities. There's Austin Energy, which serves the people of Austin, and there's CPS Energy, which serves the people of San Antonio. People in those places don't have choice, right? They have to purchase energy from that municipally owned utility. And then there are another, I think 24 or so electric co-ops around the state. And these are a little bit smaller generally. But again, the participants in the co-op, while they do have some control over where they get their energy as a co-op, they don't have the option to purchase from elsewhere. So a couple of limited pockets of municipal ownership. The vast majority of Texans that are on the Texas grid have the option to buy energy from any seller that they want. But again, they are entirely dependent on the free markets to provide them with the electricity that they need.
So I read, I believe it was in the Washington Post this morning, there was a piece about how one of the electricity sellers, well, actually, before I get to that, I've researched this in the past, and what it seems that I keep finding is that municipal-owned utilities, because their job is to serve the people rather than make extra profits for their shareholders that they can pay out in dividends, because of that, they tend to be more reliable. They go down less frequently. They're, all those kinds of things. Whereas the for-profit companies, if they've got, because if they have a little extra money left over, they'll either reduce rates, and I would guess with a co-op there's a lot of pressure to do that, or they'll improve their operations. Whereas the for-profit outfits, what happens is when they have a little extra money, they just distribute it to their shareholders as dividends. Have we seen that dynamic in Texas, or is that not something that's been measured?
Yeah, it's a little too soon to say whether, the municipal generation was more vulnerable than the open market generation. I will say that some of our municipal utilities really do operate as if they are profit-driven entities generating revenue for shareholders. Most notably, there is going to be CPS Energy in San Antonio, which generates something on the order of $300 million a year in revenue for the city. And interestingly enough, CPS Energy they built the last coal plant to open in the United States, the Spruce Power Plant, which was built, I believe, in 2010, 2011. So not a very forward-thinking decision there. And now many people, clean energy public health advocates in San Antonio are battling with CPS Energy over when and how they will close that coal plant. But, I'm not sure. Certainly the incentive for the for-profit actors is away from additional investment. To the point about whether that's going to be reflected in, who is impacted by blackouts. I don't think there's going to be a correlation there because ERCOT, the market and the grid operator, directed blackouts to occur, throughout ERCOT's service area. So regional places,
which is most of the state of Texas.
Required. Right, exactly. So even places like, Austin Energy, for example, had to administer rolling blackouts. I don't know how much of Austin Energy's generation went down. They have a coal plant as well, Fayette Power Project. Those numbers will come out. But the reductions in power that were demanded by ERCOT were spread out across the state.
And they were trying to do that as rolling blackouts, weren't they, so that they could redistribute load?
Well, we heard that. I think people's experience has been very different. And again, this is something, the real details and numbers behind which will need to come out. Anecdotally, I would say there are, people like myself up here in North Austin who have not experienced any power outages whatsoever. There are people like my sister in downtown Houston who has had no power for 2.5 days now. Yeah, just that, the average Texan's experience here has been widely varied. When we think of rolling blackout, we're probably thinking, well, you lose power for an hour here, you lose it for an hour here. The reality has been that the blackouts seem to be distributed almost at random and inequitably across the state. There's been a really interesting series of images that came out on social media on Monday night from all of our major cities. There were photos that were taken of downtown city skylines. And we all know that all of those office buildings and hotels were probably largely empty even before this recent freezing disaster. But in every major city, you could see lit up buildings, city skylines that were very much aglow, and people around the state pointed to that as apparent evidence of ERCOT's inability to cut load, to administer blackouts where it would seem to make sense.
Could it have been that those regions where you've got high-density buildings are also regions where you've got lots of hospitals, or other critical infrastructure, police and things like that, fire, or was it just general incompetence and bumbling?
Well, those are good questions, and those are questions that are going to need to be answered in the days and weeks to come. Our Governor Greg Abbott has called for an investigation into ERCOT, even as he was going on to Hannity and concluding that wind and the Green New Deal were somehow to blame. In our state legislature, we have hearings coming up in the coming days. We're not really sure right now. Certainly, I've heard a lot of talk. Again, this is just anecdotally, but people who assert that because they are close to the hospital or the water treatment plant or some other critical infrastructure that they were spared outages. The reality is we just don't have that detail at this point.
Yeah. Is there a consensus to look into this, or what I'm hearing from the Republican power structure of Texas is it's the damn windmills.
Right, and that is a message that began spreading early on Monday and that has spread like wildfire for political reasons, and unfortunately the facts just don't bear that out. I mentioned earlier that all sources of energy were having trouble. Wind did have trouble. It lost about 4 gigawatts of energy that it was expected to produce on Monday. Compare that to the thermal sources, coal, natural gas, nuclear. They lost about 26 gigawatts, so more than 4.5 times as great a loss as the wind industry. There's not one source that's responsible for what happened here. It was a failure across the board.